Thank you everyone for joining our Hard Topics panel discussion. My name is Gabriella Barron. I am the assistant editor at Charlesbridge. To give a little background about what we will be discussing today, in children's publishing, we often ask, how do we write about hard things responsibly? How do we balance honesty with reassurance? Grief, death, depression, these are all realities in children's lives, and books can help make space for those experiences with care and compassion. We're joined today by 3 authors who have written powerful stories that help young readers navigate loss and mental health with honesty and heart. Today, we'll discuss why these stories matter and how they support children and families through life's most difficult moments. But before we get into it, let's have the authors introduce themselves.
My name is Lesléa Newman, and I am the author of many children's books that actually have to do with death. I noticed that on my shelf when I was preparing for today. But my newest one is Something Sweet, a Sitting Shiva story, which explores Jewish mourning rituals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paloma Lopez. I'm the author of Popo de Xolo. It's a book that's rooted in the traditions of Mictlan, of the indigenous folks of Mexico. I'm a dual citizen of Mexico and the United States, and so I was able to explore a lot of my own traditions through this book, and I hope it has brought a lot of people solace and comfort.
I'm Karen Krossing, and you might say that I have weathered stormy days full of clouds and sunny ones too. So I'm the author of many books for young readers, like The Cloud That Stuck, which is wonderfully illustrated by Dorothy Liang, and novels like Monster vs. Boy. And like these books, all of my stories tend to have a social, emotional, dynamic story with a healing arc. And I don't shy away from difficult topics, but I do explore them through a child's lens and with respect for the child reader's journey through the story. And I'm also a mentor of new and emerging writers. And I'm in Toronto with my family.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us today, especially as we talk about topics that aren't necessarily easy to approach. These conversations can feel tender, complicated, and sometimes even intimidating, but they're also very deeply important. We're grateful to have the space to explore them together and to learn from authors who have bravely approached these topics in their stories with care and thoughtfulness. So, to start us off, I wanted to ask, in deciding to write these stories, was there a specific child moment or experience that made you feel this book needed to exist?
Well, I'll dive in. As I say in my author note for The Cloud That Stuck, this was inspired by my personal and family history with mental illness. So I grew up with a very caring mother who was also depressive and anxious and dissociating and even suicidal at times. And no one knew that her mental health challenges stemmed from abuse that she faced as a child until I was about in high school. So as she has gradually come to terms with her past over these decades since, as much as one can, I become more aware of intergenerational trauma and how that affects the rest of the family and the impact on that. And that has manifested for me as depression and anxiety and things like that. So the story is really inspired by a whole series of specific moments that you could say. So I wrote it for the times as a child where I felt confused by the sudden arrival of mental health challenges within myself or my mother. Why was my mother behaving that way? Or why did I not feel like I wanted to get out of bed today and go to school? And these moments feel like they arrive at random because I didn't understand their source. And The Cloud That Stuck is my attempt to capture how that feels when something feels beyond our control.
Honestly, the genesis of this book was that Julie Bliven, who is my editor, asked me to write the book, which was such a gift to get such a rich idea. And she also was very flattering. She said, we need a book about sitting Shiva, and you're the only one on the planet that could write it. And, flattery will get you everywhere. So I sat with the idea for a year before I actually began to write. And really, the child I had in mind was the child inside of me and the adult child that I am today, who still struggles with when somebody I know loses a loved one, what's the right thing to do? Do they want distraction? Do they want comfort? Do they want a listening ear? Do they want all of those things? And how to explain to a child that there's no right or wrong way to grieve, and that our rich traditions in Judaism really help guide not only the family through their process of grief, but through friends who can come and offer support. And, I've gone through many Shiva visits. I've sat Shiva in my own home for my parents, for my grandmother. So I took all of that experience, and I like to say I dump it into the salad spinner of my mind and pull the string. And then it's like this whirl, and then what pops out is the story.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I feel like Popo the Xolo was written very much for the child and myself as well. It was kind of born out of a time when I experienced a loss like I hadn't before. I was lucky as a child that I didn't experience death a lot of my family members. And then suddenly I was going on 21. I was pregnant with my first child, and I lost my grandmother, who honestly I didn't have a super close relationship with because of distance and immigration issues. But when she was gone, that connection felt really severed, and I didn't really know how to cope, because here I was, she was excited making blankets for my son, and there was all this potential that now I'm an adult, I can maybe pursue this relationship on my own accord. But when that opportunity felt like it was kind of taken from me, I didn't really know what to do. And that's kind of when I turned towards tradition, and I turned towards teachings, and thought about, well, how did my ancestors deal with times like these? And I had thankfully someone in the community to consult, Maestro Alvaro Telles, who I asked about the stories of Mictlan, and was able to kind of come up with this idea in a time of mourning, believing in that duality of sometimes in times of loss, there's also things that can be born or things that are renewed. And also I had a beautiful little elderly hairless dog of my own at the time, and I found a lot of comfort in him. And so I figured, kind of marrying all of those, Popo the Xolo was born. So yeah.
It honestly gets me every time, I have to say. So there, you can really feel the heart in the story. When you begin writing, who were you holding in mind? The child, the caregiver, or even a mix of both?
Leslie, I thought it was interesting you talked about writing for the adult child or something. You said the adult child you are today. And it sounds like we're all holding in mind the child that we were, and that child's sense of us, that the child that lives inside us today. So that's what I'm hearing from us all. And that's what I was holding in mind for when I was writing, the child in me who was confused and scared and uncertain about events. But I feel like I was also holding my daughters in mind, and the challenges that they have faced, and my sister as we grew up together, and of course my mother. I feel like we're all wounded, and we all hold incredible strength in this story, as for all of us.
Well, for me, there were two children. There are two children in my book, and I feel like it's both their stories. So Lizzie has never paid a Shiva call. Her best friend Joshua has lost his grandfather. So I was thinking a lot about children who have never gone through this experience. And then at the same time, I was thinking of children like Joshua, who is the child who is grieving. And I'm holding both of those children together in my mind, showing the deep friendship that they share and how there's give and take, because Joshua literally takes Lizzie by the hand and leads her through the story and explains what sitting Shiva is all about. And Lizzie comforts Joshua and lends him a comfort. She puts at one point her arm around his shoulder, and she listens to him telling stories about his grandfather. So there's this beautiful relationship that developed. So I was thinking of the book really as an opportunity for mirrors and windows.
Absolutely. Well, that actually leads into another direct question that I have, specifically related to Something Sweet and Popo the Sholo. Both your books include traditions in your story. How did you approach representing the traditions within your story authentically for both insiders and outsiders, or as Lesléa just called, the windows and the mirrors in your stories?
For me personally, of course, I consulted with Maestro Alvaro because there are so many different traditions and understandings of death and grief in Mexico. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't saying this is the belief, it is exactly like this, and there's no nuance or no diversity. And so I think that really came through in the back matter, because maybe this is the story that I grew up hearing. These are what my teachers and my community members are telling me. But obviously, I want the reader to know that these traditions can be very diverse within Mexico. They can be similar, but they can also have their differences as far as, like, for example, with the lizard, some people believe it might be a turtle. Some people believe it might be an alligator, other people a lizard. So even that, you know what I mean? Just trying to make sure I acknowledge that. And so I give space for other people who maybe we're having dialogues about the book to chime in and say, well, that's awesome that there is a lizard in this version, but for us it's this. Or maybe the places where there's arrows being thrown, it's not monkeys, it's something else, or maybe there's no monkeys at all. So like trying to illustrate these levels, but also give space, I think, is how I approached it. And I think it came out really beautifully. And I just hope that there are dialogues in the future around Popo that then transition into people giving testimonies about their own traditions.
Yeah, I draw mostly on my own experience, having, for better or worse, been to many shivas and have hosted shivas in my home. But I still think it's always good to check. So I did consult with a rabbi to make sure that I wasn't making any grave mistakes. And also, Paloma, I'm glad you brought up the all-important author's note, right? So in my author's note, I list some of the traditions, such as we cover the mirrors, family members who are directly mourning sit on low benches. But above this list is a qualifier that says, here are some Jewish traditions families may choose to observe, or something. I think it's a little more eloquent in the book than I'm being right now. But the point is, as Paloma said, people make choices, and there's no right or wrong ways. There are these traditions, but especially in Judaism, we like to put our own spin on traditions, questioning, arguing, adapting. So it's about giving choices and being respectful of others.
Karen, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I do have a question, particularly for The Cloud That Stuck. When writing about mental health for children, that requires immense research and thought. How did you approach explaining something ongoing and complex in a way that felt accessible and truthful to you?
Thank you. And I want to say to Paloma and Lesléa, both of your stories, as someone not from either tradition, were very inviting and exploratory and illuminating. So did a great job with those. I think that writing about mental health for kids starts with compassion and self-awareness. And as creators, we need to do our own personal work as well as research. And second, I think that as writers, I resist conveying that message to a young reader, and instead Paloma was talking about leaving space for them to intuit meaning from the story events. When I'm writing, I try to think about what question would I like to leave in the mind of the reader rather than what mental health message do I have for them. And in The Cloud That Stuck, it's like if you faced a cloud that stayed and then started raining, like what would you do? If you faced a problem that can't be solved, how would that feel? and respecting young readers to find their answers to the questions, but also being aware of what my story events point to. I carefully crafted the ending that the cloud did not go away and the cloud never stopped raining, because this story has no magical fix. There's no end to this story problem. And yet Tansy, the main character, finds actions within her reality. She can plant a garden. She can water it with her rain cloud. She can find actions within this situation to move her forward.
I'm curious, when we are dealing with these difficult topics, what misconceptions do you think adults sometimes have about, children's ability to deal with books that speak directly to hard issues?
I think that some adults want to make it all better out of kindness, right? Who wants to see a child feeling bad or sad? The concept of giving space has come up a couple of times. And I think that these books allow the children to have the space to express sadness or fright or whatever it is. And, there's that saying, the only way out is through. So I think giving children an opportunity to go through what they're feeling rather than try to dismiss what they're feeling is what these books do.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think coming from the perspective also of I'm an early childhood educator and I'm a mom to two, one now just entering toddlerhood and a 3-year-old who is experiencing a lot more complex emotions nowadays, trying to navigate those with a lot of honesty and transparency. And I think sometimes, as parents, we have this protective nature, or as adults, to kind of block out anything that's negative. But these experiences are really crucial. And they help children learn so much, and also learn perseverance, but also learn how to be in connection with themselves and hopefully not become so lost in the happenings of the world around them that they always know that they can reconnect with their feelings within. And I think we just have to help them navigate that. And books like these, I think, are helpful tools.
I agree with Lesléa that all adults want to protect the child readers from harm, and sometimes they can take that too far by blocking a child reader from an authentic experience in a book that the adult might deem as too difficult, or the adult's bias is getting in the way of allowing the child reader to self-select books. And it comes from a good place. But when I'll take it back to my child self and say, imagine if I had found books as a child that reflected my experiences, it would have just been a relief to show me that I wasn't alone. They would have felt like a warm hug and a supportive conversation. They would have recognized me. And so that's why I think the full spectrum of childhood experiences belongs in books like these ones for the children who need them.
Absolutely. And I have kind of an offshoot question, but as we talk about the way that these books open conversations between the readers and the adults, what specific types of conversations are you hoping to come from your own stories?
Well, I think very naturally for my book, Something Sweet, any child who has lost someone can see, what Joshua's family does. They share memories, they laugh, they cry. So, that could very easily lead into a child and family talking about their beloved family member who they lost, and sharing memories in the same way and making that space for them.
I hope my story opens communications about big feelings between children and their adults, open up questions about what to do when our emotions feel beyond our control. We can take small actions like planting seeds today for flowers that will bloom later. If we're sad, we can uplift ourselves through some daily actions or routines. We can reach out to support. So I'm hoping that The Cloud That Stuck sparks age-appropriate conversations about big feelings. Stoicism is a big topic of conversation in my family, and The Cloud That Stuck is kind of a love song to that as a way to cope with challenges. You still have choices when things are hard. So, what does that look like for you?
The conversations that I'm hoping happen, not only just for folks who read, children, adults alike, to find comfort in Popo de Xolo, but also I see it as kind of a call to tradition for folks to look back at their own cultures, at their own cosmologies, and to understand that our traditions have the answers as well, and hopefully become more in touch with themselves and their roots. These things aren't so different, how we might view grief in a more mainstream sense, or maybe in a psychological sense, or whatever way that we kind of lean in towards now more commonly. Those things also existed in our traditions, and how to marry the two, essentially.
Moving forward, I'm curious for the writers who are just like, I'm not sure I want to talk about this issue. I'm just a little bit hesitant to write about that. What sort of advice or what would you say to writers who are hesitant to write about heavy topics for young readers?
Well, I think we owe our young readers a true reflection of themselves and our world, and through our stories. And so that inevitably comes with some heavy topics. Not every story will be like that, but some will. And I think that every craft decision that we make while we're writing and revising can be thought of in terms of how does it serve the story, or how does it serve the reader? And our books will better serve our readers when we convey the full spectrum of a child's worldview and experiences, even the difficult ones. So when we look at our craft choices, we can also care for the reader through that story. Like Popo is just such a lovely companion through this story of death that it's just a helpful way to care for the reader, an example of how to care for the reader on the journey through the story.
I completely agree. And I also think that just ties back into kind of what I mentioned earlier about owing them honesty, making sure that the experiences are authentic, and that our children can have tangible experiences with these feelings and these dilemmas. And I appreciate this shout out to Popo being such a lovely companion, because I think he is a gentle assistant throughout the story, not just for Nana, but also for the reader. And he is a part of their community, looking towards community in these difficult times.
So I don't really love giving advice, but if I was pressed to, I would tell a writer to just write the story and not think about publication or any of that stuff, but just write it for yourself. And then the second thing, I would pose a question of what book did you need as a child? What book would have made a difference in your life? So, for example, for me, The Cloud That Stuck would have made a huge difference in my life, because I was a very sad kid. And I did feel, I often identified with Pigpen from Peanuts, which was a different kind of cloud. But I just felt like I had this cloud. And what I loved about the book is that the main character befriends the cloud. So the cloud doesn't leave, but the cloud is integrated into the main character's life. And I also loved that the end wasn't this, okay, everything's all better, the cloud is gone, because that's not real. So I feel like these books give children tools, and I don't think you can underestimate how important they really are.
Absolutely. So to kind of round out the discussion, I wanted to ask if you could tell every child who reads your book one thing directly. I know that's a kind of tall order, but one thing.
I would say that, especially directing to a child who has lost a beloved family member, that family member in one way is gone, but in another way is never completely gone, because their love is still there and they still live inside you. And I hope from reading my book, Something Sweet, that can be experienced through Joshua's memories of his grandfather.
That's kind of the message that comes at the end of Popo, is that they never truly leave, that we have their memories and we have the family that are still around to talk about them with. family can sometimes, there can be tumultuous relationships. I know I grew up in a household where there was a lot of like infighting, and I didn't have family necessarily to go run to, but find those people, your chosen family, maybe it is your blood family, to be in community with, and take care of your grandma. She loves you. Take care of her if you can. If that's a healthy relationship to have, take care of your grandma and your dog.
I hope that what we would get to in the conversation would be that weather happens. It doesn't have bad intent. It's not out to get you. It just is, right? It just is. And what are we going to do?
Well, I do, even though in the beginning you joked that it was kind of, cheating the question a bit, I do like the approach also of asking a question, because, we have a book at Charlesbridge called Reading Picture Books with Children, and it really talks about how, posing the questions can incite that discussion, and, you'd be surprised at the brainiest, amazing things that kids come up with. So, yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. As we conclude the discussion, I do want to know, looking beyond, what are you currently working on? Any exciting things that you want to share with me?
Popo the Sholo was my debut, and so now I am just navigating what happens after you have a debut book come out and do well. I have some things in the works. I'm being a mom, I'm being a teacher. So yeah, TBD.
I have coming up another book that addresses challenging topics through a mental health lens. My debut middle grade verse novel comes out in March 2027. It's called Forever Fries, and it confronts first loves, eating disorders, and the pressures that face today's children.
Lesléa, how about you?
I have several projects coming out this year in 2026. I have a book called Rainbow Cookies, which is somewhere up there. And it is about a little girl whose favorite cookie shop gets pushed back when they bake fried cookies. I have a book called Song of the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out in 2027, which tells the story of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel through the scrolls' point of view. Then I have a very timely book called Welcome, A Wish for Refugees, also coming out in 2027, along with 2 companion books, Celebrate Shabbat with Mommy, Mama, and Me, and Happy Shabbat from Daddy, Papa, and Me. So it was really a challenge to get everything into those titles. That is about Shabbat. Each book is about an LGBTQ family. And then just one more thing. I'm really, really thrilled. I haven't had a book of poetry for adults published in a while. And I have a book coming out this fall, 2026, called The Last Flame Last. And it's a book of poetry for adults.
Well, you sound like you must be incredibly busy.
I'm very busy. Gratefully so.
Yes, a lot of great things. Well, to wrap things up, hard topics don't take away from childhood. They're part of it, even if we wish they weren't. Books you've created offer comfort and connection when children need it most. Thank you all for your honesty, courage, and the deep care behind your storytelling. We appreciate your voices and the important space your books create for young readers and their families. Please join me in thanking Lesléa, Paloma, and Karen for creating stories that help children and families navigate the most difficult moments with compassion and care. Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate it.